what we looked at 3 years ago as maybe a 40 or 45 day lead time on ordering materials, we've pushed up to 60 and in some cases 75 days. It's really important to have good logistics partners, communicate well with them, and try to control as much of that as you can, because the more freight that's out of your control, the more susceptible you are to disruptions in that supply chain.
Folks, this is Sid Patel, CEO of Beverage Trade Network and International Bulk Wine and Spirit Show. I have here Luke Arie, Director of Global Logistics of Delicato Wines, a great winery out in US, one of the biggest bottlers, one of the biggest, wine companies in the US. And we're going to hear about the logistical challenges that, a winery of that scale is facing, and especially what other wineries can learn from that. Luke, thanks for joining me here.
Thank you.
Great. So, Luke, let's start with your role. It's usually in the large companies. So many small companies usually have to wear multiple hats, right? You are the Director of Global Logistics. Could you explain me your role and what are your KPIs in that? What does it include?
I'm part of the supply team at Delicato Family Wines, and we deal with quite a bit of freight, both international and domestic, and that includes bulk wine that we're importing and moving domestically in tanker trucks, as well as finished goods, both inbound and outbound, and some of the materials. So in our team, we control the relationships with the vendors and work with them to ensure that goods are moved on time, in full, and everything just keeps flowing so they can keep making wine and shipping it out.
And that's both in and out, right? Like buying side and then the selling side logistics as well?
Correct. Typically a lot of what we ship out is picked up by the distributors, so there's not a real freight demand for that, but we do have some outbound finished goods that we control the freight on, and probably 10 or 15% of that fulfillment, that distribution is still under our control.
Got it. Now, look, with all that's going on, apart from tariffs, I mean, there is this whole supply chain, alternate routes to movements, to the penalties on the Chinese containers, to many other things that are going on, right? I think that's not coming out in the news, but I'm sure you are understanding that game on sort of demonopoly of China is the goal here, right? So what are the concerns here? Like, what are the pressing issues that you are facing today?
Well, really, for the last 4 years, there's been a lot of volatility in the supply chain, and especially internationally. And as those issues and challenges hit, they spread out throughout the supply chain, and they impact domestic movement of freight and even warehousing and storage. So it's been a rather exciting time in logistics for the last 4 years to deal with a lot of these issues. The key really has been to remain flexible, and there's a lot of challenges out there for sure. This disruption in ocean freight service has been big. Lead times have stretched out from what was traditionally maybe 35 to 45 days. Even with some of what we've recovered in the last few years, we're still looking at 60-day supply chains and longer. A lot of service issues with the carriers. It's become incumbent upon the shipper to know where their containers are when they're shipping, and to be able to, work with your freight forwarder, work with your partners to get those shipping lines to move containers when they're sitting for too long. And so it's really turned into, it was always a proactive requirement to move freight, but it's really kind of exacerbated in the last few years. Just the onus on the shipper to really track and keep up with their freight.
Like, how is it impacting? Is it impacting in cash flow? More cash is needed to run a business, less orders. How are you sort of adjusting, like less orders are happening between you and the vendors? What is the way you are tackling this situation?
Here lately, we've seen orders kind of start to go down. I know industry-wide, we've seen a lot of that. At the same time, the supply chain, like I said, is stretched. So even though there's less activity and fewer conveyances moving, it seems like you're still spending just as much time putting that together, coordinating with the carriers, ensuring that that happens. It's just a day-to-day challenge to follow up and identify those issues and fires and address them.
What about the raw materials, Luke? The glass bottles, I believe,
Mhm.
is a challenge, right? So, what other examples are there which are really becoming very tough these days when it comes to the raw materials?
We had an interesting situation a few years back because a lot of the glass that was being made was coming out of Eastern Europe, and there were a lot of glass manufacturing facilities in Ukraine that were providing glass to our European partners. That really created a tight spot with the geopolitical situation there, as most of those bottlers couldn't fulfill their orders, and a lot of wineries had to find new sourcing for bottles. We haven't faced quite that same situation here in the US because we do source most of our stuff domestically. But definitely, those providers here domestically also have international supply chains to feed into their warehouse and their
Hmm.
inventories. We've definitely had some interesting situations to very quickly have to replace bottling molds or find vendors who could provide something that was adequate for what we had already provided and or what we were already using. And then, of course, when that happens and you have to change a bottle, that changes everything about that particular SKU, right? Because now you've got new materials in there. So it's a lot of administrative work for the winery as well to go back and ensure compliant with everything that's changed in our supply chain. So it is a real team effort. It's not just logistics. It's purchasing and sourcing. It's our bottling teams. Everybody's impacted when it happens.
On the raw materials, like this 20% increase of duty, for example, or anything that you import,
Mhm.
bulk or the raw materials, like has it all started, right? Like it's you're paying and then it's getting cleared up. So what are the like the pretty much like net it's the costs are coming, it's real, right?
It's real. It is indeed. And the most challenging part of that is just the uncertainty on how it's going to be applied. We've
What do you mean
seen,
by that?
well, a few weeks ago, we went through the exercise to try to assess what that tariff impact was going to be in early April. And at the time, there was a lot of, before anything was announced, there was talk about upwards of 200% tariff against European wines.
Hmm.
So, a lot of analysis went into how that was going to impact us, whether it was at 200%, 100%, or
Hmm.
20%. Then, of course, the guidance comes out, and the guidance has a phased approach, and so that's new analysis on how that's going to impact, and
I get it.
and
I
then
get it. So the planning means nothing right now.
it's
Pretty.
just constant. Yeah, you plan, and then everything changes, and you plan again. So you just
Are you
you just
looking
keep saying that's
for
going to impact.
alternate suppliers? And I don't want to scare your suppliers, but as a tip, like you may be trying to set up two or three different supply chains now. Like, what are you planning?
Yeah, I mean, we've recently brought on some new material suppliers to address our corks, capsules, corrugate, everything that goes into that. I don't think there's always a need to have somebody in case something goes wrong now, right?
Hmm.
In case that supplier runs out of inventory, can't deliver on time, and we've got bottling demands to meet. But it's a contract situation as well. So most of the time, you've just got to find a way to work with your partners and make sure they understand your needs in advance. A lot of advanced planning is really what has helped us to get through this. And like we say, with those lead times changing, it's important to understand what your suppliers are going through as well, and understand how their supply chain has been impacted, because maybe you need to start ordering earlier than you ever planned before, right?
Hmm.
I would say, like I said earlier, what we looked at 3 years ago as maybe a 40 or 45-day lead time on ordering materials, we've pushed up to 60 and in some cases 75 days,
Hmm.
just so we're planning well ahead and getting that communication out.
How do wineries, especially the small and medium-sized wineries, I'm sure even large has larger risk now, like yourself, can reduce their risk in the next 90 days? Like, what are some things that you suggest?
I suggest really trying to control as much of your supply chain as possible. And I know that's challenging for smaller wineries because of just the economies of scale on the amount of freight that you're moving. But it's really important to have good logistics partners, communicate well with them, and try to control as much of that as you can, because the more freight that's out of your control, the more susceptible you are to disruptions in that supply chain.